So far we talked about truth and then patterns, and a natural segue for me off of patterns is habits, where to me our habits are the patterns in our actions or the patterns of our actions. And in that way, I do think of habits as being the product of the patterns in our lives and the actions in our lives and the overlap between them. Uh, and there's this book many people have probably heard of called Atomic Habits that is very popular. It helped popularize this idea and help bring it to my attention. Uh, the guy who wrote it is named James Clear, which is very ironic because it's a book that provides naturally very clear advice on practical things to do. And it's less about like trying to uh, do an inspirational or motivational speech to get you to change your life, and more about practical suggestions, oftentimes boiling down to taking small actions that accumulate over time, hence the title Atomic Habits. So, one of the best ways to do it, I don't recall if he explicitly says it like this in the book, but this is what I've taken from it and how I do it, is to track habits that you want to change, literally tracking the data for whatever it is. Because when you track that raw data, say you want to drink less, and you track actually how much you are drinking and track every single drink. When you do that, you're confronted with the reality of the situation in a numerical context that is very difficult to brush aside. Whether or not you share it with other people or keep it as a private thing, uh, that is the truth, and you are confronted with it in that moment. And I think it is very easy to hide the truth from ourselves by not tracking the data so that we don't have to feel accountable to it, because it's just this nebulous thing of, oh, who knows what is actually going on. But when you track the data, you're confronted by the truth and you start tracking down the truth, literally by tracking the data. Which leads me to the next point, that the numbers don't lie. And I think that our lives are statistical outcomes. Uh, what I mean by that is we live statistical lives where the outcomes that happen to you are the statistically most likely outcomes given what you have done statistically throughout your life, etc. And you could go on and on about that, but I just think it speaks for itself. People get what I mean. I would think on a fundamental level, on some, this is like the law of averages, etc. And our habits are data driven behaviors. So if you want to get at the average expectation, like the expected value of your life, you need to look at the habits, because those are going to be the core drivers underlying it. And when you then, beyond tracking it, actually want to get into changing it, what I have noticed is effective is gradual change as opposed to sudden dramatic change, um, which often is fleeting and less stable and less reliable long term, uh, versus gradual change that takes more patience, but ultimately, I think, does a better job of uprooting the problems. If, for example, this problem that I am trying to address developed over the course of years, it is unlikely for me to expect that I will be able to resolve it in 6 weeks, no matter what I do. Versus if I have a sort of symmetrical view of this took 5 years to develop, maybe I should expect that it could take up to 5 years to fix. That doesn't mean that it will, but I think it is good to have a sense of proportion and a sense of realism when it comes to changing deeply ingrained patterns and habits, rather than the superficial sense that I think that a lot of self-help stuff helps prop up of like, no, you can do this, you just gotta like do it for blank amount of time and then you're good. And in reality, I think everybody knows in practice that that's not how it actually works. And then fundamentally, I just think that we are the sum of our habits, and that you don't, it's not the only input. There's also luck, and under that, you could put a lot of other factors, but you could think of it as we are the sum of the internal and external factors in our lives, and the internal factors are fundamentally driven primarily by habits, and the external factors, you could call it luck, you could call it whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that is my thought on habits and why they are important.